This is one. Thank you, Larry. Yes, this meeting will be recorded today. This is one of two trainings that we're going to have on this topic. The first one is today, obviously at 10. The second one is July 29th at 10 o'clock. My name is Jill Nagy Reynolds, and I'm with the SBA Columbus District Office. Many of you probably received a flyer from me. That flyer regarding these events, that flyer had a link to the second training as well, the one for July 29th. So if you would like to attend the second training, you can go back to that flyer that I sent out, and the registration link is there. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce Larry Brown from the Cincinnati PTAC. Larry will be monitoring the chat today. I am not able to stay on the full time. So just and Larry will let you know how he wants to have questions go through. But I'm really glad you're here today. I think that this is a topic that needs to be talked about more, and hopefully you'll learn a lot today. So I'm going to introduce Larry first, and then I will introduce Lauren. Larry?
All right, thank you so much, Jill, and welcome everyone for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Larry Brown. I am the procurement counselor for the Ohio University PTAC at Cincinnati. And just wanted to tell you just a little bit about the PTAC, or Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. PTAC was established by DoD, or the Department of Defense, and it's now administered by DLA, which is the Defense Logistics Agency. And it is a nationwide network of assistance centers that help folks to do business with government agencies. So in essence, that is our mission, to increase contracting activity between small businesses, prime government contractors, local, state, and federal agencies. We also provide services, tools, trainings. We help businesses with their government and procurement related needs. And so some of the other services that we offer, our primary function is one-on-one counseling or consulting. We help with securing registrations such as sam.gov, the System for Award Management, which is a repository for businesses that do want to do business with the federal government. And we assist with that registration as well as others. We assist with certifications such as SDVOSB, which is Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, as well as HubZone and a couple of other service certifications as well. We help with identifying RFPs, sources sought, bid solicitations. We help with bid proposal preparation, and we actually offer a service called Bid Match. And Bid Match is a service that, with search criteria such as NAICS codes and keywords, we're able to search over 30 federal websites and match you up with bid opportunities that are coming up, and those will be emailed to you. We help in marketing strategies and methods. The primary tool for marketing in the government contracting space is a capability statement, and we assist with and provide you with tools to help create that capability statement. We also help with identifying subcontracting opportunities. We have several research tools to help with government markets and forecasts. And as you see, we put on workshops and seminars with agencies, with one of our favorite partners, as we're doing today, the SBA, Small Business Administration. And lastly, we also help with post-award assistance. So even after you're awarded your government contract, we help with any hiccups that may occur, as well as with invoicing and getting paid. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to Jill.
Thank you very much, Larry. Just a reminder to everyone, please mute your lines. Make sure you keep your cameras off for now. If you do have questions, you can submit it through the chat. And then also a reminder, if you are not familiar with PTAC, I encourage you to reach out, become a client. It doesn't cost anything. Your taxpayer dollars have paid for it, because government contracting is complicated and time consuming, but there are resources out there that can help you. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter for today is Lauren Wagner. He is the Director of Risk Management, and he is actively engaged in helping organizations become more secure and compliant by performing risk assessments and advisory services based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is NIST SP 800-171, and the DoD Cybersecurity Maturity Model Program. He is a designated CMMC registered practitioner. And prior to joining Centricom, the company that he works for, Lauren held global senior management positions for a major manufacturer in information security, networking, and data center operations. He is a respected expert in his field and has presented papers and provided dozens of presentations to organizations regarding risk mitigation, cybersecurity, and information technology. He has a doctorate in information assurance from the University of Fairfax, an MBA from the University of Findlay, and a certificate in security management from the National Defense University. He's a part-time lecturer at the University of Findlay for more than 20 years, and he has played a major role in the development of their information assurance program. I'm very, very pleased to have him as a presenter today. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Lauren, and maybe just one more thing. Do you prefer that people send you questions in the chat as you're on a screen, or do you want to wait till the end of the presentation? You're on mute.
The old mute button.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jill, and thanks for the introduction. And to answer your question, certainly people are welcome to ask questions as we go along.
Okay.
And do my best to answer them while we're going through the presentation.
Very good. And thanks again for presenting today.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks to the PTAC and Small Business Administration to providing me with this opportunity, and me and Centricom to share this information today.
All right, I think you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, I'm gonna turn my camera off there.
Okay.
And then we will bring up the presentation.
All right, I can see it.
Okay.
Yep,
Good.
it's full screen. You're good.
Good deal. So, good morning, everybody. I hope your day is starting out to be a good one and that it continues that way. I have a lot of information to share this morning, and I'm hopeful that you'll find it of value and worth your time. And as we said there a few minutes ago, please feel free to send any questions. I think Larry's going to be monitoring the chat, and if I don't see it come up, he can bring it to my attention, and we'll do our best to answer it. So you've already heard this information. I'm not going to repeat it. So the agenda for the presentation is in two parts, and I was asked to do a cybersecurity hygiene, if you will, overview in part one of this presentation. And then part two, we'll be talking specifically about the CMMC, the NIST interim rule and supplier performance risk system, and then recent updates with CMMC, which are ongoing. Actually, I was just looking at some postings early this morning of recent conversations in this area. And then we'll talk about NIST 171 and its role in this implementation. So I'm sure all of you if are in tune with the news and been seeing this almost daily events having to do with various types of ransomware in large organizations, large and small organizations being impacted, but the larger ones are usually ones that make the headlines. Some of the very recent ones there, SolarWinds, and I think SolarWinds is back in the news. Actually, the Colonial Pipeline was certainly a significant event, and then one of the more recent ones here with Kaseya and their VSA product that they use for monitoring and managing remote systems. And then we have these payment scams that are ongoing, whether it's business payments such as CEO fraud or business email compromise, unemployment scams that were really prevalent earlier this year. Delivery scams seem to be ongoing, especially around holidays, and then of course the annual event anymore with the IRS scams that continue. So we all ask ourselves, what if this were to happen to my company? Isn't there anything that I can do to avoid these events and defend against these business impacting events? And not just talking about the ransom that's being asked for, but the fact that your system, your networks, your business effectively could be shut down for a period of time. But there are steps that you can take, that we can all take to help avoid becoming a victim. There's no 100% guarantees, but there are certainly some steps we can take. So let's look at some of the statistics. As of first quarter of this year, the average ransomware payment was $220,000. Now that's a little over that. That's nothing compared to the 70 million that's being asked in one of the recent events, but it continues to increase, and there's a number of reasons for that increase. Most clients that are affected experience anywhere from 3 to 14 days of downtime. And that's not just downtime where their systems are held captive by the ransomware itself, but it's also downtime related to rebuilding the systems, rebuilding the services that you're providing in your business. And then the thought is that these events are just going to continue to not only grow in terms of the number of organizations being impacted, but growing in terms of the impact on the organization itself. And we're already seeing where it's no longer just holding your files, capturing your files, encrypting them, and holding them for ransom, but also there's a bigger tendency today to be in your systems for a longer period of time, collecting information, and then holding that, as blackmail as well, and threatening to reveal what might be sensitive, confidential, or otherwise private information. And of course, we're seeing this happen today. These statistics from IC3 or from the FBI are pretty revealing. So we see this huge number up here up in the upper left about business email compromise in approaching $2 billion in terms of losses, within the year's time. And then on the right-hand side, we see ransomware, which the number looks a lot smaller, but in reality, there's not as many ransomware events that are reported to the FBI or reported to the federal government. So that number is artificially low, but it's still, $30 million is still a lot of money. But we're seeing this now as, the price is being paid or being asked for a single event. So again, we have the question, what can a small business do to prevent becoming one of these statistics? So let's step down a little bit through this process. A few years ago, I think about 10 years ago, actually, maybe a little longer, Lockheed Martin came out with what they called the kill chain. And the kill chain is really a flow chart, a representation of what happens in the process of setting up an attack and then also completing that attack. And this one here is pointed specifically at ransomware. This was published recently by JP Morgan, and they call this 7 stages of ransomware. And the slide's a little busy, so let's just break it down a little bit more for you. So we see the first step in the event is the delivery, and this is predominantly from a phishing attempt, a phishing attack. And when I say predominantly, we're talking about 80 to 90% of the attacks that occur are a result of a phishing type event, where either they've gone to a website or an ad or downloaded something or maybe put a USB into a device that's infected, but largely it's through phishing. So once once somebody clicks on a link or downloads a file, it installs in on the employee's workstation and starts this whole sequence of events that occurs after that. So once it gets downloaded, it contacts the command and control server and gets more instructions, maybe more malware, well, basically more instructions on what to do next in downloading information to the device. Then it starts looking for more credentials, starts crawling through the network, trying to get more access to more accounts, more devices, more administrative access in particular, so that it continue its look for information. So that takes us to step 5, the discovery step, where it's looking now for files to encrypt. It doesn't necessarily encrypt them right away, but it starts building that to-do list, if you will. And then once it's moved through the network sufficiently, gained access typically to multiple accounts, then the encryption process may start. Now, also during this time is this internal reconnaissance. And you see this more and more where access to internal emails is done, access to other internal files and perhaps sensitive and confidential information that then is used later again for increasing emphasis on that ransomware attack. And this can occur over multiple days, weeks, and maybe even months, and depending on how much information that they want to gather and how patient they are in gathering that information. So the ransomware attacks in 2020 numbered approximately 11,000, and then worldwide about 65,000. And so what do we do about it? How do we avoid this, help prevent this from happening to our organization? Well, it really does come down to basic cybersecurity hygiene. And as you can see here in this slide, almost all successful attacks take advantage of these conditions. And it's not unusual to see attacks taking advantage of vulnerabilities that have been fixed 3 and 4 years ago, especially when we're talking about third-party software that is on individual systems within an organization that is long overdue in terms of patching. So the objective here is to minimize the vulnerabilities, and then ultimately we minimize the threat. As I said, there's no 100%. There's no guaranteed assurance that a system's not going to be hacked or not going to become a victim of ransomware. But the the evidence is pretty clear that there's fundamental things that an organization can do, should do, to minimize the opportunity for these events. So looking at a few technical statistics. Now, this slide says 57% of data breaches are attributed to poor patch management. And as we've seen in many cases, many events, and as I noted earlier, a lot of times, unfortunately, the vulnerabilities that are taken advantage of have been known for in a pretty long period of time and haven't been fixed or corrected. Some of the recent news, even around the deal with the Kaseya product, they had vulnerabilities that have been reported to the organization way ahead of the event that took place here a couple of weeks ago. 74% of data breaches start with privilege credential abuse. And a lot of times this is simply because organizations tend to deploy PCs and laptops with users having administrative control or administrative access over that device, running actively with an account, a user code that has administrative access. So then once they click on that link, or they download that PDF file or other type of file, and it gets on their system, the bad guys now have essentially administrative access to that system and can pretty much do anything on that system that type of access would allow. And then if that individual happens to be an administrator in other areas, and what I mean by that, if that account is also used to administer other devices, then that compounds the problem. Then this last figure here on 93% of cloud deployment, configuration errors have been contributed to more than 200 breaches over the past 2 years. So this is where we're seeing, cloud type solutions, if you will, that there's just been an error in setting up the privileges or the accounts or the configuration of the devices that has allowed these activities to take place. So we come down to, really these 3 areas: patching known vulnerabilities, management of privileges, and proper configuration management. Now, when we talk about patching, organizations might have reasonable practices in place to keep, basic operating systems up to date. However, often what's neglected are the third-party products, the third-party applications, and a few of them listed here, like Adobe products or browsers or Java-based tools. We see this a lot when we do risk assessments for companies. And part of that risk assessment process is scanning their network, scanning devices, and seeing what is on those devices. Oftentimes, there's a lot of old application software, several versions of old application software, especially when it comes to things like Adobe products, that people download a new version of the product, but they don't get rid of the old version, and it's still sitting out there and increasing the vulnerabilities of their devices.
Lauren?
Yes.
I think this will be a good point to ask this question from Randall. What are the requirements for a small business that utilizes Microsoft 365 for 99% of their operations?
So The question is where everything is running, saying Office 365, everything is actually running in the cloud.
That's correct.
Yeah, and that assumption. Well, certainly there, it's going to be more up to date, kept more up to date and maintained. And one of the advantages from running Office 365, if in fact, it is running in the cloud. I mean, some organizations have a hybrid model where their email, might be running in the cloud, but the Office applications, the Office suite, is actually running on the devices and maintained on the devices. So yeah, if it's in the cloud and it's being maintained, then that would certainly lessen the opportunity there. However, we still have to keep in consideration those third-party products that they may use in that event that aren't part of the Office suite. Like I said on the other slide about, something like Adobe and some of those products.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
hopefully that answered your question. So on this slide, we're talking about the privilege management and maintaining proper credentials. Not using privileged accounts when not needed. So, for example, you are likely to have administrative access of some type that's needed on your network, and maybe you're running an Active Directory and you have a domain administrator account. But the point here is that whoever would be using that account only runs with that domain account when they're actually doing domain work. And outside of that, they would have a separate account. They would have their own account for doing other tasks. Now, that certainly isn't the most convenient thing to do sometimes, but from a perspective of managing privileges, that would certainly be one way to do it. And even like I said, on a PC, for example, or a laptop, ideally you would be running with an account on the laptop that does not have administrative privileges, doesn't have administrative rights. But then if you want to manage that device yourself, you're authorized to do that. You would have a separate account for doing the administrative work. This concept goes to business applications as well. So somebody that doesn't need to have access, for example, to payroll data, or doesn't need to have access to HR data, shouldn't have that access. Now you can set up a policy that says, if you don't have a need to know, you shouldn't be accessing this information. And that's certainly a good policy to have, but it's a lot better if they can't have access to that information in the first place if they don't need to. So I think I've covered the other things that were on this slide in our conversation. Configuration management. In this case, some examples here would be not leaving default accounts on the device. And this is also true for you that have home systems. A lot of people working from home now, and you're accessing the network, maybe your company network directly from your home network. It's not unusual for people to install, say, a home wireless router and leave the default account on that wireless router and not change the administrative account or administrative access. And that's a real benefit for the bad guys, because they know, and you can see for yourself, you go to Google and Google default accounts, default vendor accounts, for example, and you'll get the information back that says what some of these popular, like a Netgear device, for example, what the default administrative account is and password for those devices. So, that leaves them pretty open. So you want to get rid of the default accounts, or at least if you do retain the default account, change the password to something other than what it is out of the box. The last two bullets on here about Windows, you know, the newer version of Windows 10 and above, have a firewall that's comes with it. It's built into the product. And it also has Windows Defender and antivirus that comes with it. It's built into the product. It's free to use as it is out of the box. Now, we can debate about whether those are the best products, but they're there and they're free. And if nothing else, you know, take advantage of those to help protect your own devices. Now, what hasn't been on the list so far is talking about backups. There's just so many cases where an organization is impacted by ransomware, and they're in a situation where they have to pay the ransom in order to get their files back because they don't have good backups, or they've had backups taken and they haven't been tested. So they think that they have good backups. They've been doing backups for some time. An event occurs, they go to restore, and the restore fails for whatever reason. And then now they're stuck. They still don't have their files. They're still locked and they can't recover from it. And that also is increasing the amount of time that they're down. In fact, some organizations have rationalized paying the ransom because it's quicker than it would be to restore from their backups. And that's probably very true. But again, we have this ethical dilemma, if you will, about whether we should be paying ransomware in any event. But the data backups are important. They're more than important, they're critical. Highly recommended that you have backups done, either doing the backups yourself or using a third party or using one of the cloud applications that provide for backup services. Now, you know, we hear this term social engineering, and the reason that I'm going through these is because, you know, this is such foundational, the practices and foundational information that is going to provide value to you and your organization, whether you're in a position to have to implement CMMC or not. But even if you do, these are going to be part of the process. And because social engineering is so rampant today, and the majority of incidents you know, are resulting from phishing and ransomware, you know, I thought that would be, you know, a key area to be talking with you guys this morning. So when you look at social engineering, you know, and here's a formal definition, but the bottom line is it's a con, and they've been doing these cons forever. You know, I would suggest that probably ever since there's been people walking on this earth, there's been some type of confidence trick or fraud or con going on. And think about it. You know, you're probably familiar with a Nigerian scam. You know, the email that you get that has this long explanation where somebody somewhere, typically in Nigeria, has money that for whatever reason they're not able to get at it, but you're the long lost relative that they've discovered in asking you to help them out get this money, and all you have to do is front them a little bit of money to pay, you know, certain expenses. Well, this has been going on. These emails were sent out years ago using fax machines, or not emails but faxes. To just give you an idea of how long, you know, these types of electronic, if you will, fraud schemes have been going on. The change today is that with the internet, people can set it a laptop in a Starbucks in Nigeria and, do a scam and do it on millions at a time instead of, just a few or a few dozen or just a few people if you were doing it face to face in real time. But the reality is a scam is a scam. So we look at this from a phishing perspective, which is the predominant method. And we're seeing so many different areas where they're taking advantage of people and these scams. And I don't know about you guys, but even just recently here, I've been getting a significant amount of potential scams, email scams, and text messaging scams, much more than I did, even 6 months ago. So they're out there knocking. These are criminal organizations in many cases. They're very experienced and they're in the business to make money, and they don't really care, whose money it is that they take, although, they're targeting some of these large companies. There are many small companies, many individuals, they're being impacted by this as well. You just don't see them in the press as much. So these can come to you as a link or a graphic, attachments, as we mentioned, asking you to pay a bill online, requests for information where you click on a link and now all of a sudden, you've clicked on go into a website that's downloading malware. Typically, they're promoting, some sort of urgency, whether it's urgency to act, to avoid something bad, or urgency to take advantage of something, like you're going to win a contest or something to that effect, but you have to do it now. And oh, by the way, you have to send us some money to help you get your money. I had one of these a few years ago. I had one that was on a lottery. You may remember some of the lottery scams. And they said I had won so much, X amount of money, several $1 million. And all I had to do was send in a fee to help them process the transaction. So I'd send them an email back and said, well, just take the fee out of the $1 million you're going to send me, and we'll be good from there. Of course, I never heard anything about them from that. Example of a email phishing scam. This one, this is talking about you need to renew your Norton antivirus, and they're being billed, or will be billed, almost $300 for it. Here's a couple of other examples of website phishing. And one thing that you really have to look for, and you notice up here on this one from Amazon, you can see that email address, or that URL, web address, AMAZONN. This is but when you look down here to sign in, it has Amazon.com. So you have to be really, really careful in looking at these email and this messaging, especially for like these URLs. This is a very, very common practice. It's used a lot in the CEO fraud and business email compromise, where they'll set up a domain, send you an email from a domain that the domain name looks very, very similar to the real one. And it's often overlooked. People are busy. They don't necessarily see that, and to their peril. This is one that was going around, or has been going around since we've been experiencing this issue with COVID-19, saying that you've come in contact with somebody that's tested positive, and now they want you to click on this link for more information. Facebook's, other social media, very common, to be sent a message. In this case, it's a chat message. It has a link. It gets sent to a friend. Friends click on the link, you know, and on and on and on, and then multiple people get compromised. So your business or you as an individual could definitely become a statistic, and the odds are not on your side. It doesn't matter what you think you have or don't have that somebody might be interested in getting. It doesn't matter what kind of business you have. They are just looking out for ways to make money, and make money at your expense. As we've seen these demands continue to grow, on this slide, you see in 2019, the highest ransomware demand was $19.3 million. And now in 2021, we've seen one of the more recent ones that they're asking $70 million. Highest ransomware actually paid 2019, that's known. In 2019 is $6.4 million, 12.9 in 20. And this year so far, it remains to be seen what that high number is going to be, but it's certainly likely to be more. This is the other thing that we're seeing as well, is this ransomware as a service that's being run on the dark web. These are big organizations. They're run as a business. They have help desk and technical support, and they sell solutions, if you will, to help people commit acts of ransomware, or sometimes just disruption, denial of service attacks. So they're doing this as a business. As I said, it's subscription based. The individuals that are doing this today, they don't have to have any technical knowledge whatsoever. All the tools are made available to them to do this, to initiate the ransomware and to collect the money.
Lauren,
Yes.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Let's see, can you explain the difference? This is from Carla. Can you explain the difference of endpoint protection versus having virus protection on individual PCs and laptops?
I'm sorry, did you say this, Carla?
Yes, from Carla.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the question, Carla. They're really fundamentally the same. And endpoint, you know, a laptop or other device, laptop, server, whatever's connected on the network would be considered an endpoint. So they're synonymous in that respect. And you know, that would have been one of the examples, like I said, like Windows Defender. If you're running Windows 10, you have Windows Defender that's freely available, that you can use for antivirus on your system.
We have a question from Sue. With cloud and video conferencing, the nature of cybersecurity has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. Is CMMC going to be more cloud and video data centric and move from ISO universe to the new digital universe geared towards these new kind of breaches?
Hi, Sue. Thank you for the question. And I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I mean, CMMC is designed to protect government confidential information. That's really what its intended purpose is. Now it's built on top of NIST 800-171, which is made up of 110 controls and is a pretty comprehensive control framework. So it makes it less likely, if it were to be implemented, completely implemented, it makes it less likely that you would be subject to some of these vulnerabilities. But it's also going to depend on the way that the organization deploys it. And I'll give you an example, whether it's cloud-based or not. There are some examples in CMMC implementation where the component of the organization, the network, systems, servers, database, whatever makes up the parts of the network that contain confidential, controlled unclassified information, or CUI, could be set up as an individual segment, and the controls then in place are applied to that segment. That also means then that they wouldn't necessarily be applied to the rest of the network. So in that type of an architecture, it's potential that your network itself, your business network itself, may not be completely protected, even if you implement CMMC, because fundamentally the intent is to protect that CUI data, not to protect the whole organization, which brings up implications about disaster recovery and business continuity and availability of systems that could be impacted and still affect your business and not expose any CUI data. So I hope that lengthy answer helped answer part of your question. But when we're talking about CMMC, I just want to make it clear that this isn't necessarily a complete protection for the whole organization, depending on the way that's implemented.
Thank you.
Is that all? Is that all for now, Larry?
Yeah, there's one, but I'm going to send a direct message to Greg. So you can proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, this is talking about some of the action steps to be prepared for a ransomware attack, to help protect against a ransomware attack. And of course, it has value beyond that, but that's a predominant mode of attack today. So, what is your risk tolerance? And when we talk about risk tolerance, part of that is how long do you think your business could go without being able to operate with your network or your computer systems. Fundamentally, when we think about DR or business continuity, it involves being able to sell product, deliver product, take payment on product, and then make payments, to keep your business running, and of course pay your creditors going along. So how long can you actually survive in the business not being able to do those critical functions? In some cases, it could be a matter of hours. In some cases, it might be a couple of days. But that's a discussion that you should have and make some determination. What would it look like if you ran a scenario, if you had a ransomware event or any other kind of event actually that might impact your ability to continue your business with your dependence on your data networks, information networks? What would happen if you paid the ransom or you didn't pay the ransom? Another consideration, but today that's becoming a pretty contentious discussion. Law enforcement prefers that you don't pay the ransom, although there have been law enforcement entities that have. It's becoming a major issue with insurance companies, especially for organizations that have cyber insurance, and that insurance is becoming increasingly more costly. Being able to understand the implications involved in being required to pay via Bitcoin your business continuity plan. All of these are involved in some aspect of your business continuity. Backups, as I mentioned earlier, and then who within your organization or within your support functions, whether it's your staff or other vendors that you work with and depend upon, you know, who's the team that when something does happen, you know, is brought to the table to make decisions and react to the incident. So we have some action steps here, and this is broken down into, you know, technical and human actions. They're all basically human actions, just some more technical than others. But the patching aspect, privilege management of privileges, proper configuration management, backups being tested, your business continuity plans, increased awareness of the social engineering tactics, which we've talked about, CEO fraud, business email, compromise fraud, websites, phishing, social media, text phishing, email phishing. They're coming at us from all directions now. Used to be primarily email, but now we're getting it, you know, in other dimensions as well. And then, you know, a link provided there that if something were to occur, that you can report the activity to the federal government or state government, depending on where you're at. And also keeping in mind that in many states, almost every state now has a reporting requirement, so that if you've had a data breach that might result in disclosure of personally identifiable information, you have, you know, anywhere from say 48 to 72 hours to report that incident to authorities and to your customers and business partners. So this slide has a few tips on it. I'm not going to read through them. I think everybody's going to get a copy of these slides, so you'll have this information available to you. But the email security tips, in that first one there, checking the from field, make sure the sender is legitimate, is that is a major tip there to be able to take a look at that and see if it's actually a real domain from the organization you're expecting it to be. And then this next slide, this is a handout, or intended to be a handout anyway. It has social engineering red flags. This comes from a company called KnowBe4. They provide phishing and education services and resources. But anyway, this is an excellent tool for you and your employees. And the link is here to show you where you can get this yourself. Highly recommended information. So that concludes the first part of the presentation on cybersecurity hygiene, and we'll be moving on to CMMC, introduction to CMMC. I stumble on that too sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I guess, Larry, before I go into this next part, are there any questions on the previous part that are still outstanding?
Yes, I have a question from Greg. He says that he has a lot of questions regarding third-party software use, like Libsodium and its wrappers, Widevine or ReadyPlay, etc., which is third-party and could be a security loophole. So how does government software prefer to deal with encrypted video other than simply clear key, etc.?
I'll have to apologize. I don't think I have a good answer for that, but I would be happy to look into that further and respond back to respond back to him if he would be willing to share his email address.
Yeah, we have a couple of folks that are very technical savvy, and they haven't exactly asked specific questions, but I know that you typically would make that offer if they do have those type of very specific involved questions, that at the end of the presentation you'll be providing your contact information. Is that the best way you'd like to handle that?
Yeah, that's fine, Larry, and I'd be more than happy to do it that way.
Okay.
And it does have my email address was on the initial slide, and it's on one of the last slides as well.
Okay. Let's see. I think that this is from Randall. I, as a small business, would find useful in the second session, or would go to the 100+ CMMC controls. Also, there's a list cloud-based software that talks to their compliance to CMMC. I don't think there was a question there, but what is the date from Kathy, what is the date for company compliance?
Well, there isn't one yet. If we're talking about compliance to CMMC, and I'll be talking about that as we go through the remainder of this presentation as well. So I think that will more than help answer a question. But the short of it is that there's only been 2 organizations to date that have been qualified. Let me rephrase that. They have passed the CMMC level 3 certification, and there's 2 of them that have passed. However, there are no organizations currently allowed, have the authority to actually perform assessments, and there are no certified assessors yet either, other than provisional. There are provisional organizations that are doing assessments and provisional certifiers, but that's a very, very small number, and a very, very small number of organizations that are being certified through them. But that's not the intended or the normal way it's going to be going forward. And we'll be talking about that more.
All right, that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. So cybersecurity maturity model certification. Eventually, all companies conducting business with the DoD will have to be certified. That's the way that it is defined today. Now, when this first started coming out, say a year and a half ago, after the CMMC accreditation body was established, this was being looked at as a 5-year cycle, pretty much a 5-year cycle where everybody was going to be, would need to be certified within that 5 years. Well, things have not progressed at the pace that they had hoped for or intended. So that 5 years, it's still on a 5-year cycle, but that 5-year cycle continues to move out. And we can talk about that more as well. And also, this particular part of the presentation is really considered to be a introductory in nature, and then the session that we're going to be doing on the 29th will be going into much more specifics on CMMC itself and aspects around it. But this will be a kind of a high level, and hopefully get you going and understanding more in this area, and certainly it'll generate more questions. So we have 5 designated maturity levels, and we'll contrast the CMMC with NIST 800-171, where 800-171 is 110 controls and it's all or nothing. It doesn't matter how big or how small your organization is. All of those controls need to be met. With the one of the advantages of CMMC is that it's broken down into 5 maturity levels. Level 1 being the lowest, which has the least number of requirements, which would be, excuse me, much more appealing, especially to small businesses. And then, going typically to level 3, which has, I think, 130 practices, basically controls, but they refer to it as practices. So it's a little bit more than 800-171 at that level 3, but a lot less at the level 1. So there's some advantages to that. We'll be talking more about that. But the thing to point out here that it is critical, as it's stated today, with the model, with the plan, that when the certifications come about, you will have to be certified, or you won't be able to do business with the Department of Defense. And we're going to look more at the actual events today around 800-171 and what that means from a service perspective as well. So the accreditation body was established in January of last year. Their role is setting the standards and the processes and the requirements for assessors to become certified, as well as organizations becoming an accredited third-party assessment organization. We have what's referred to as registered practitioners and registered provider organizations who can assist with obtaining the requirements for CMMC, but they themselves are not qualified or authorized to do certifications. So here's the model structure. It has 17 capability domains. You can see those domains are broken down into specific areas, everywhere from access controls to incident response to risk management. And each of those areas has specific practices that are defined for an organization to perform. So here we see the 5 levels. These are broken down in terms of practices per level. Level 1 being 17 practices. And level 1 is intended for protecting the confidentiality as related to federal contract information, or FCI. You have level 2, which is intermediate. And level 2 is where we start talking more about maturity with the practices, and much more in terms of policies and procedures in identified practices. Level 3 has the 130 practices, as I mentioned, which is slightly more than the NIST 800-171 requirements. And then we have level 4 and level 5, which are intended for, more highly secure organizations. Maybe an organization that's dealing with weapon systems, for example, that would have higher security and confidentiality requirements and more advanced security implementations. So we can see here, the thought was that about 80% of the organizations requiring CMMC certification would require level 1. And then, fewer percentage in level 3, and then much fewer in level 4 and level 5. But even if you take, the number that's thrown around is roughly 300,000 organizations in the defense industrial base or defense supply chain. So even 20% of those it's 60,000 organizations that would require level 3, but depending on the source, I know some are thinking there'll be a lot more level 3 than what the thought was initially, but we'll see. So these particular terms, FCI is federal contract information, information not intended for public release, provided or generated by the government under contract to develop or deliver a product or service to the government. And then we have CUI controlled unclassified information, which is considered sensitive but unclassified, and what the government wants to keep private. Now, and this uses some examples of weapons test data or information about military personnel. There's much, much more broader than that. I've seen lists of what might be considered CUI, and it'd be difficult for you to find something that's not in one of those lists. And the challenge is that even though CUI is supposed to be identified contractually for an organization that's working with the government, that isn't always the case. And then there's also CUI that can be created by an organization that might be creating some type of part or component for the government. They generate their own CUI data, and that also isn't extremely clear. So there's some challenges around what really falls in these areas, making it more difficult as well, and whether an organization is going to fall into that level 1 or level 3. So we talk about the DFARS regulation, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement at 252.204-7012. And they came out with the interim rule last fall. Well, let me back up a little bit. This rule is what required the implementation of NIST 800-171, the System Security Plan, and the plan of the POEM, the roadmap, the things that an organization is going to do and improve security to fill the gaps. This was required as of the 31st of December 2017. So we've had several years here already where organizations were supposed to be compliant with this standard, this control practice, and obviously that didn't happen on a large scale. The intent is for it to apply to all businesses in the defense industrial base that handle controlled unclassified information. Potential loss of business if the regulations not met, and relies on a self-assessment, and that's where there's been the primary gap, is in the performance of the self-assessments, and people really even understanding what they needed to do in order to comply with this regulation. So am I required to implement NIST 800-171? And the answer is yes, if your business retains or processes controlled unclassified information. What tells me if I'm handling CUI data, theoretically look at your contracts. But I've looked at some contracts and they reference the DFARS clause, but implies that CUI data is involved, but the CUI is not necessarily identified. So here's an example of contract. This is actually a purchase order with one of my customers. And here you can see in section I, this has this reference to the DFARS clause, the 7012 DFARS clause. And you can see here that's circled here at the bottom, the larger circle has DFARS, and it has a reference to this website. So, all of this information isn't necessarily in the contract or necessarily in the purchase order. It's there by reference. And one of the challenges is that the individuals responsible within an organization for executing on 7012 may never see this, because these are being handled, can be handled by purchasing or contract administration. They may not know what's actually being said here, and it may not be getting passed on. So I encourage you, those that might be listening that are working with the government, working with the federal government, if you think if they have any question at all, to see if you can get a look at the purchase order that's involved in the contract or the contract itself, and see if it has reference to this clause, because that can be extremely important to you now and in the future. So here again is another section within that particular purchase order, section B, and there again is this URL that has a lot of the detail referenced there within the details, not in the actual contract or purchase order itself. Now, this is a newer one. This is actually from a contract where it is referencing the interim rule. So there's more information in here, although there's still information that's by reference. There is a little bit more information contained in this than just pointing to a URL. This is mandatory to be in all contracts now. For the organizations that contracts that would potentially have CUI data. So certainly the intent here is good, and the intent is important, and to protect confidential information, and also with these controls being implemented, these practices being implemented, you would have an overall risk reduction and minimize opportunities for business disruption. There's nothing really when we're talking about protecting the CUI type data. There's really nothing there that talks about business resiliency or availability. Now, that is within the control framework, but not when we have these conversations about CUI data itself. But hopefully it minimizes opportunities for business disruption, decreasing downtime potential, increasing trust with business partners and customers that you'll be able to deliver, as well as protecting the confidential information, and then increased awareness, training awareness for all employees. Now, having said that, when we look at CMMC level 1 says nothing about data backup and protection and restoration, or anything about training and awareness. So I think that's two gaps there that need to be considered. So the effectiveness of this, as it was required as of 2017, approximately 300,000 businesses in the defense industrial base, and it was estimated that about 10,000 of them actually implemented all of the NIST 800-171 controls. So that's what really has brought us to the interim regulation, as well as CMMC. So the DFARS interim regulation is now required as of last fall, the end of November, beginning of December, required an organization that handles CUI data to have a basic self-assessment completed, to use the DoD assessment methodology to then grade where you're at in terms of execution, implementation of those controls, which generates a score, a number. So out of 110, how many of these controls do you have in place, completely in place? And then there's some in this assessment methodology where some of the controls are ranked a little bit higher than others. So it might have, for example, a value of 5 points versus 1 point versus 3 points. But ultimately the idea here is that you generate a score, a number between, and it could be a negative number. So some number up to 110, which 110 says I've completely implemented each of these 110 controls or requirements. That number then is to be used to input into the SPRS database. And reflect where you're at in execution of these controls. And then if the number is not 110, when does the organization expect to be completely at 110? And then that date goes in there as well. Now, this is going to be used by the Government Contract Administration, determining whether an organization is then qualified to bid or to be awarded a contract. So a couple of things play into this. Let's say you're providing widget A and you have a competitor providing their version of widget A, and your score that you put in the SPRS database is 80 and theirs is 95. Well, it could be argued that they're more compliant and therefore more secure, and then that award would go to them, you know, as based on that fact. So in the simplest terms, based on that fact. That's one way that could be used. Now, this isn't a one and done. You can do this assessment periodically, and and upgrade to score periodically. So that has that opportunity as well. But that's what this requirement is expecting you to do. Now, if you're already in contract with the federal government and you're already required to conform to this, you may have received a letter that's similar to this one. And this was received by a customer from the Defense Contracting Administration, Contract Management Administration. And I'm going to give a blow up of this a little bit. So basically what this says is that it should have been implemented not later than December 31st, 2017, but you are to comply with this interim rule and you're saying that you've done the self-assessment and that you have a score in the SPRS database, or you've sent a letter as is outlined here with the information that's required to system security plan and other information validating or acknowledging that you are in conformance with this.
Lauren?
Yes.
Lisa asks, if you don't have a contract that handles CUI, but have proposals out that will, if awarded, do you comply before award, or will the DoD give you time to comply after award?
My understanding is you have to comply before it's actually awarded. You can bid, and a bid could be accepted without being in complete compliance, but but you have to comply for it to be awarded. Now, again, you have this little bit of an out here on what the level of compliance is, and that is strictly up to the contract, the ones that are, excuse me, providing the contract. If you have a score of 80, you know, they may think that's okay and that you're working on making this better. And it might depend on what makes up that score of 80. And what I mean by that are the particular controls that are in place and the maturity of those controls. But it's totally up to them on whether that is an 80 or whether it's 110, but that should be expressed and then met before the actual award.
This question is from Dapo. How valuable or useful is cybersecurity insurance?
Well, I personally, I think cybersecurity insurance is very, very valuable. However, I think it's also been somewhat abused, and insurance companies are beginning to act accordingly. So, you know, an organization has to determine what the cost of that insurance is, you know, versus what the relative damage could be. And of course, the idea of having insurance in the first place is it's going to cover those costs of your business operations that's being impacted. No, so it's an individual thing by organization. You know, what is your risk tolerance? What are you willing to risk? It's really not much different than other insurance. You know, whether you have insurance that covers you in the event that you have a fire. Well, what do you think the odds are that you're going to have a fire? What's the risk of that event occurring? And then what's the outcome if it does occur? What's the damage, and how much of that damage can you as an organization sustain versus what could be covered by an insurance policy?
Thank you, Lauren. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks. So Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS. This is, in quotes, the authoritative source to retrieve supplier and product performance information assessments for the DoD acquisition community used in identifying, assessing, and monitoring unclassified performance. So you can see how this breaks out here. This is intended for the acquisition process, regulatory and policy requirements, for on-time delivery scores and quality classifications, price item, supplier procurement risk data and assessments. The one that I have highlighted here is NIST SB 800-171 assessment results, which is one of the items that are stored or made available in this database. Now, here's an important point for everybody to understand. In effect, today, if you have a government contract that involves CUI data, you are legally supposed to be, legally required to be 100% compliant with NIST 800-171 as of December 2017. And you're signing contracts attesting to that. So, and also with the interim rule, where you can attest that you're not in 100% compliance, but this is where you're at, and when we're going to be done, you're making an attestment there as to fact as well. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not trying to make a legal claim here, but from what you can see on the slide, there has been cases where an organization's been held to this False Claims Act. And what this really comes down to is saying, I've attested to having done X, something happened, an event occurred, or maybe there was an audit, and through the audit process, it was determined that I'm not in compliance with X, and I intentionally made this false claim. So there's the risk here that, you know, if you put a number in, say, in the SPRS system, you want to make sure that number is accurate, and that if there are items in your system security plan that says that we're doing these things, we're compliant with these things, these items, these controls or practices, that you're able to substantiate that. There's a document that's NIST 800-171A, and 800-171A breaks out each of these practices into sub practices. So for example, the very first one, 3.1.1, is on access controls, and it has 6 components in there that you are obligated to meet. And in order to say that I'm compliant with 3.1.1, I have to be doing all 6 of those. And so you'll want to reference them that way. So just a heads up there that you want to be very diligent, very accurate with what you're claiming you're in compliance with. So this brings us to some updates, some questions about assessments and roles. You know, are there organizations certified to do certification assessments? As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 currently, and I understand more to follow. But this is kind of misleading, the way that this is stated. So then let me explain. The organizations themselves have passed level 3 certification. They've been audited, they've passed that. So that has given them C3 PAO status. What they have not been given yet is the authority to do an assessment themselves. So these 2 that are authorized in the database, they are authorized as C3 PAOs, but they are not currently authorized to do assessments. As a matter of fact, there are currently no certified assessors that for them to even hire because the training programs haven't been completed in order to train assessors and grant them that certification. They're still in a bit of a holding pattern here. When will the CMMC AB certification process start? Well, it was intended to have already started. It was intended to have training programs starting, I think last month, maybe a month before. That has not yet occurred. There are no certified training providers, I don't believe, at least unless it's happened here in just the last few days. So, you know, when will this start? Well, it was supposed to start the first half of this year. Actually, it's supposed to start even earlier, but the first half of this year. And I've got a note here that says perhaps the second half. I don't have a crystal ball. All I'm stating here is that it didn't happen in the first half. There's the potential it may happen in the second half, but there hasn't been anything stated specifically that that's the case. What about organizations that can provide risk assessments and help us get ready for certification? There are a number of organizations in that category: registered providers and practitioners and registered provider organizations that they're available today, and they are listed in the marketplace. I obtained registered practitioner status earlier this year, and as did my organization, Centricom, organization that I work for. We are there to assist others in getting through the process, understanding the process, and getting them prepared for completing 800-171 if it's appropriate, and moving them, towards CMMC. Some concerns, and some of these are concerns I've seen that are pretty recent, suggesting that CMMC compliance may become a bottleneck. It's expensive. It's considered by many to be a burden, especially on small business. There's a real concern that they're going to lose small businesses because of the requirements and the cost of mitigation, implementing the requirements, and actually becoming certified. As I mentioned earlier, you can see here, we have 300,000 plus organizations that require certification at different levels. And, even in best case, if you break that down over even number over 5 years, that's a lot. And without currently having organizations that can do this, it's looking like it's going to be a while yet for get through this process. Now, there are companies that feel that they are ready for the certification, for whether it's level 1 or level 3, and they are, lining up with the organizations that are C3PAOs, get their name on the list, which is fine, but there's no telling when that's actually going to happen. And then, alluding to what I said earlier, this quote is strengthening national security and supply chain resiliency by improving DoD cybersecurity certification. Report involving 108 manufacturers found that 24%, or nearly 1 in every 5 companies, said they might be forced out of the supply chain due to expensive compliance costs. And that is a real concern. There's numbers that are being thrown around now. I've seen some recent posts on LinkedIn that are very large numbers. I mean, $50,000 to $150,000 for just the certification process. That's not preparing for, it's not included in that number. It hasn't been done. So, anybody's estimate is really blue sky in it here a bit right now, but there's numbers being thrown around, and frankly, they're concerning. So recommendations at this point, focus on NIST 800-171 implementation now. The further that you can get down that path, the better off that you're going to be. And it also will, since this isn't going to happen overnight for CMMC, this also allows you to put together, plans appropriately to implement the necessary controls, and that might involve services, that might involve product purchases. So there is some spend that's likely involved to get there. And if you start now, at least you can plan that over time and appropriate that spend, in budget cycles to make it a little bit more palatable, perhaps. Reference NIST 800-171 revision 2, and there's a link here where you can get that document. Use NIST 800-171A for assessing the security requirements. It breaks it down into great detail, and again, there's a link for that document. Perform a self-assessment. I highly recommend that you use third-party assistance to do that, and also to refer to the DoD assessment methodology to help get your score so that you can put that into the SBRS database if you haven't done so already. Work towards incremental improvements. This is a big deal for many, especially if you haven't implemented, significant formal practices in your information security or cybersecurity program. There's work that goes into this, and so prepare accordingly. And lastly, if you haven't started yet, get started, because it, like I said, it'll help you plan better and prepare for the expenses and the work that's involved. So if there's additional questions, I'm ready to take those now. There's a little bit of information about the organization that I work for that's included here, and my contact information. And then at the back here, there's a number of resources for you to help that are referenced in this document, or to help you get more information. So thank you for your time and attention today. I hope you found the information worthwhile. And as we said a bit ago, you're welcome to contact me if you have additional questions, or I can try to take some questions now. I believe we still have some time.
We do have a couple questions in the chat, Lauren. From Sue, it was mentioned some companies paid to get out of ransomware situation. At that point, the cyber criminals have all the data and keys too. So how does it work if they pay? The amount of money which would be spent on ransomware blackmail can go toward backup recovery efforts. So my question is geared towards what is the reasoning behind why companies choose to pay, and how is this related to CMMC certification? Do they need to recertify? So I guess there's two questions. Why, if they have all the data, how does it work if they pay, and do they have to recertify CMMC certification?
Wow, yeah. Well, to the first part of the question, the intent is that the bad guys, have infiltrated your system, your network. They've encrypted the data. In some cases, they may have also exfiltrated data to be used, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the blackmail or something like that. But as far as the encryption, the basic intent is we have the keys, you pay us, we give you the keys, it allows you to decrypt the files. I've heard stories where this has worked completely, and the bad guys gave them the keys and they were able to decrypt the files, and everybody was happy and went on their way. I've heard stories where some of the files were decrypted and some were not. And I've heard stories where they were given the keys to decrypt the file, and then it turned around and experienced another ransomware event that held them hostage again. So that's some of the scenarios, from a ransomware perspective. And primarily, the organization doesn't have the backups that they need to restore. If they had the backups they needed to restore and could do that in a timely fashion, then they wouldn't have to pay the ransomware. And that doesn't mean that they wouldn't still get attacked again. There's no guarantees for that either. As far as recertification, I believe there's going to be a recertification every 3 years anyway. But I would think, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibilities that if you had experienced a ransomware event, that it could result in an audit that might then impact your current certification status. Now, I'm speculating on that, I don't know that, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that. And then one of the other things I heard is, what does this have to do with CMMC and protecting CUI data? Well, as I mentioned, in some cases, in many cases now, they're exfiltrating data and using that as a hammer as well. So that means that potentially the CUI data is exposed as well. So that would be where there would be an impact on that.
Next question is from AJ. Do you think they'll actually hit the date that they threw out to have CMC completely rolled out by 2026?
And in my mind, no. Because that would be 5 years, 4.5 years from today. Yeah, 4.5 years from the day. And they, like I said, they don't even have anybody that's certified to assess yet. So I don't think that they'll be able to hold that date. Now, having said that, you know, the Pentagon has been re-examining this CMMC, and there's some speculation that some of these requirements, you know, might be modified somehow to make it less expensive and to make it lessen the impact on, especially on small business. But there hasn't been anything come out yet about that, and I say that because that could change the time frame, but none of that's known yet, and the results of that haven't been issued.
Another question from AJ, is there any financial assistance being offered to help offset the cost of certification?
There is, for manufacturers, there is some financial assistance being offered to assist in the cost of the self-assessment or assessment using a third party. There's some assistance there. There's been discussion that the costs might be able to get recouped in some fashion through the contracting process, but there's nothing definitive. So I'm not aware of a program beyond what I said for having the initial assessment done. I'm not aware of an actual program that would or grant process that would help cover that expense.
Question from Eric, will this presentation be available for download in PowerPoint? Yes, we'll be sending out the presentation via email to everyone. Earlier in the chat, I put a link to access the video as well on PTAC's website. So yes to that question. Question from Randall. What is the average range of third-party costs for self-assessment for small companies?
I haven't seen anything published that would give a, you know, an accurate number in that respect. I've seen some, heard some anecdotal comments that suggest, you know, somewhere we could say between 10 and 15, $10,000 to $20,000. I think it depends a lot on the size of the organization and the complexity. Because it's primarily consulting hours, and you know, so the smaller organization most likely is going to be less expensive than, you know, a larger one or a site or multi-site.
Okay, I think that a list of links in this presentation included in the email would be helpful. Okay, I will do that. So unless there are any other questions, we're going to start the wrap up. I want to thank you, Lauren, for an excellent presentation, very informative. We got several inbox comments to that effect, thanking you for the information and a lot of information folks weren't aware of. Those of you that asked very specific questions, you see Lauren's contact information there to be able to reach out to him and have your questions answered. Once again, as Jill mentioned earlier at the top of the program, there will be Cybersecurity Part 2 on July 29th, 2 weeks from today, and more great information that we'll be sharing once again in partnership with SBA, Small Business Administration, on this very, very important topic that at some point, if you're going to do business with DoD, Department of Defense, and particularly the federal government in general at some point, is something that we'll need to get a handle on and get CMMC certified. So once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us, and you all take care and have a wonderful day today.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.